Hello, Internet. I'm Corione, your witch in residence here on YouTube. And today I'm going to talk about one of the Star Trek movies that was okay, but it wasn't one of the best, and that's Star Trek Insurrection. Now, watching through it, there's a lot of things we could talk about here. We could talk about the forceful removal of a indigenous-ish culture. We could talk about um, the ethics of Star Trek admirals. We could talk about Data's whole portrayal and his emotional state. Instead, I want to talk about something else. This planet is considered to be, in the Star Trek universe, something of a fountain of youth. The radiation there can be harvested and used to, pull back the aging process. And in fact, Geordi gets actual sight for a little while being on this planet. And so part of me is saying, hey, wouldn't it be cool to have a fountain of youth and be able to, go back before my pretty crippling knee injury, or go back even further and be full of that vim and vigor from when I was fencing almost all day, every day. And yeah, that would be cool. But then I started thinking about the negative repercussions of a place like that. So, for starters, when we talk about kind of a fountain of youth type place, how are you going to fit everyone on that planet? Right? There's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to live there and stay there. So, even if you could somehow get the existing population off the planet without them realizing it, then getting enough people onto that planet that want to would be a terrible challenge, right? Collecting enough of that radiation from the nebula would deplete the nebula after a while. There is not enough fountain of youth for everyone to enjoy it. And that's the first problem. Because while Trek doesn't have while the Federation doesn't per se have money or an economy based on labor and whatnot, so you don't have a rich class, you do have what I would say is an important class. And that's where it's almost more risky. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're the Federation president and you want to visit this planet. Well, you should be able to because you're the freaking president. But that allows you to stay in office potentially longer, or at least in a position of authority and power longer. And that means you're going to eventually have another shot at getting at this planet when you start feeling the effects of age again. So imagine, if you will, you are in this situation where you're going to have a species or a group inside the Federation that, because they're very good at maintaining their power base, they will be able to continually visit the planet forever. So Picard is always a captain, right? The Federation president is always going to be either the president or somebody very high up in the cabinet. But then that means Riker is always going to be a captain because there's no retiring captains. And if, one decides to either quit or there's some sort of mishap and what have you, that's the only way you're going to get promoted, is the accidental death of someone else, which is going to lead to a lot of people, having accidents in order to make sure that there's spots available for the up and comers. So you now have, really, the only way to advance in your career is by assassination. You have people who are thousands of years old running the government, and are impossible to dislodge. So the ideas that they had when they were kids are still being fought over that day. You have a youth in any field really that cannot possibly get ahead because the old guard never moves on. Then you have, and that's just the most practical of concerns. So immortality is cool for the individual, but terrible for society. That's why this interests me, because all of us at some point have toyed with the idea of living forever, or at least a lot longer than we live now. But what are the consequences of that, right? Consider an old age pension, right? Some of you have already achieved that pension, others are still working towards the retirement goals. That pension will run out. You're going to have to work even longer to remain not working even longer. So instead of, 40 to 60 years of work before you retire, now it's like a couple of thousand, right? That sucks. And even then, who says you have to retire if you really like your job? Right? And that causes all kinds of weirdness for the government, right? The tax weirdness alone will freak them out. So if it was like, for example, if we're talking from the individual perspective again, if it was just an individual, you'd have to change your identity routinely in order to stay one step ahead of local government figuring it out. If it's a society-wide, old age retirement gets bankrupted before the next two generations get through. So there's no money for them. And what do you set the retirement age at? These are large scale problems that you can't really solve. Even with things like replicators and whatnot, eventually you're just going to straight up run out of space, right? How many more children are going to be born to the people that wind up living on this planet? And what are they going to do? Well, I guess they can keep colonizing out. But as they keep colonizing out in this rapid expansion, the galaxy's going to fill up fast. That's another part of the real danger of a society of immortals. And the only way to handle it would be to drastically cut the birth rate. And how do you manage that exactly in the Star Trek universe, where people can just go off and start a colony with very little? These are some of the inherent dangers of immortality on scale, right? The individual immortal is cool. The society that's immortal is going to die. And it's going to choke on its own growth. In fact, if you take a look at the Warhammer 40k universe, they actually touch on this. Because there are leaders in the Warhammer 40k universe that are thousands upon thousands of years old. And the bureaucracy that is involved because of this is so immense that people who want to go on a visit to Earth will probably get approval for their great grandkids to do so. They won't get the approval. And when they get there, it's a teeming mass of billions. It may be another 3 or 4 generations before you get to look at the Imperial Palace. That's how ridiculous exceptionally long lifetimes can be. And that's only on, the higher up classes in society that happens. So it's something to really think about, especially when thinking about your own future and whether you really want immortality or not. Because the minute you get it, somebody else in theory can. And then multiple somebody else's. And then once we get to that point, we're stuck. Now, in a Wicca mindset, we firmly believe that we reincarnate into the next generation of people. And a lot of people see that as a better way of dealing with the wheel because we're at least being born into a system again. Now, believe in reincarnation or not, that's a form of immortality that they are adhering to. And that's an interesting one, right? Christianity has a another dimensional realm that they call heaven, where good people go for their immortality. So do several other religions, and usually they kind of slot in between one of those two directions. And that's probably the closest we should get to a form of immortality, unless we find a way to infinitely expand the population's space and infrastructure. We would destroy ourselves with immortality. So I suggest to you that immortality through, you know, the traditional means of things like reincarnation or, or an extra dimensional space is great. And that's what we should be going for. The other path of immortality that I highly recommend is having children, because they will outlive you and they are part of you and you are part of them. And if you teach them right and teach them the right values, then they will pass those on. And that's a beautiful version of immortality, right? There are other cool attempts at immortality, statues and whatnot. And while I personally think that once it's my turn, a colossal solid gold statue should be erected in my, with my likeness, shouting "Remember me," throughout the world. I can settle for something a little simpler. But that's the idea, guys. So, what do you think? Do you think immortality at scale, like at an industrial level, can work, and why? I'd love to hear your explanations on why you think it can work. And if you're somebody who is thinking about immortality on an individual scale, I'd love to hear your plans. I'd love to hear what your thought process is on that, because I think those kind of stories, that kind of beautiful fiction is worth hearing about, and I'd love to see it in the comments. Otherwise, guys, I do want to remind you that this is going to be our last time in the library for this year. Um, I'm going to switch to the Samhain location, and we're going to get ready for the end of October charity stream that I do every year. So please come out. It's going to be a divination night, so I'm going to read tarot cards, read runes for those online, and I'd love your help on this. I'd love you guys to come out and give generously, because our charities could really use it this year more than any other year. So, guys, let's see what we can do. I want to thank everybody, and merry meet, merry part, merry meet again. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.